Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling Dem Leaders, Biden, Pelosi, Garland, and others, respond to GOP fascist physical threat with fear and timidity. So, this is I'm breaking down a element of the modus operandi of fascist tending and openly fascist political groups, and breaking down an element of that, and also the response to that element by the opposing parties or the objects of that, in this case, intimidation. And it's all, when I say it and when I describe it to you, it should be obvious to you. It should be, you'll say, aha, duh, of course that's the case. But I think breaking it down into this unit of behavior or of action, and then the corresponding reaction, will uncover a critical piece of our politics. And by discussing it in this element, discussing it in this as a part of a step of a modus operandi of a political program, we can then respond to it more effectively. So anyway, fascists believe that politics is a form of warfare. Okay, that they're bringing, and this comes from, in fact, the origins of fascist politics, where you had military, from the First World War, various military officers formulating fascism, or military veterans, demobilized. The Freikorps in Germany, and also Mussolini in Italy, using the tactics of warfare and of politics, and bringing warfare to politics, and bringing the Manichaean idea in warfare that your enemy is someone who you subjugate, who is not fully human, often, not necessarily, not 100% of the time, but that certainly in total warfare, in modern warfare, that you are you're able to do whatever it takes, so to speak, to get your goals. Okay, in this case, for fascists, whatever it takes, their goal is power, and they will do whatever it takes. So, and their attraction to martial, 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 rhetoric, and also posing, comes from that, and also the worship, of the leader, the authoritarian leader, or the fascist leader, is of a person who issues threats by way of their acting, by way of their speaking, by the way of their entire personality is one of threat, often hyper masculine threat. The idea that one is an ultra masculine person, that therefore from whom all kinds of threat and danger and menace against the enemy. Okay, and at the same time, sometimes there's another side to this, supposedly, and boundless, quote unquote, love for the people, the real people. That they're various sort of manifestations or theatrical events where they enact this supposed love for their people, while at the same time issuing, often intermingled with the threats issued outward toward these, or inward toward the menacing internal enemy, often represented by Jews, or sometimes by gay people, homosexuals, so forth and so on, or now trans people. sort of threats that are issued at those people, the insidious people hiding within the body politic. But anyway, so this intermingling of this love and supposed bounteous indulgence for the good people, the people of their, who are their supporters, and then a vicious hatred and dehumanization of the enemy, and often with these threats being very issued, so forth and so on. So anyway, so that's the kind of high level abstraction, which is the fascist politics, the politics of fascism, and then the psychological, some psychological elements, but also obviously political elements that are enacted using that. And so, and you have in the United States now here, with the increasing of, we have a polity and a physical society that is rife with physical threat. You have people who own guns. You have about 10% of the population that owns most of the guns, and there's some other people there as well. And you have parties that are attempting to, or the party, the GOP, is attempting to expand the influence of this group that can issue threats by nature of just being there. And also you have legislatures, so forth and so on, that are attempting to magnify and to make easier the ability to intimidate and threaten other people by using guns, or by suggesting, by showing a gun, okay, and by open carry, among other things, or concealed carry without any preconditions. So in other words, either universal, supposedly potentially universal concealed carry, or open carry. So, but anyway, there's already in our society, we have this is not inventing the atmosphere of threat. We have for instance, a car culture that favors designs of trucks and cars that look menacing, that look like they're vicious animals, or they're huge menacing machines of various kinds that can hurt people. And they're designed that way so they can, by driving them into crowds, or driving them or against another car, that they will damage the other car more than your car will. And so you have a whole arms race of threat already built into our society. But then you have fascist political operatives, in this case spearheaded by Trump, or Trump being sort of the opening to the acceleration of this trend in American society. He didn't invent it, but he decided he greased the skids, and he, in terms of his own personality, as essentially a gangster himself. Gangsters use threats, physical threats, to get what they want. And so his gangster tutelage under Roy Cohn, and also just generally his fascination with gangsterism over his life, and his emulation of gangsters, so forth and so on, and then now his decision to enter politics and use a gangster style, or just to be the gangster that he apparently is, to gain power for himself and also money, and to rescue his businesses through corruption, among other things. Or to make them richer, whether rescue or not, I don't know. But anyway, so in this atmosphere of threat, you have choices in terms of how you respond to the threat. So do you respond to the threat by being scared? So if you're a person on the street and you're threatened physically, you would, of course, it makes sense to be scared and to attempt to, depends on what means you have available. If you do have your own destructive means and you decide to engage in some kind of battle with these threatening people, that's one thing. But they can be so numerous and well armed that you don't want to do that. So, but anyway, but the government should be able to respond to this use of a physical intimidation. Okay, so physical intimidation becomes a power tactic, and it becomes a means to accumulate more political power. And it appears to me then, I'm now moving on to the response, is that the Democratic Party has acted like frightened quasi crime victims or potential crime victims in responding to this show of either, be it just word in terms of verbal bravado or actual, physical danger that might come from opposing the right wing. So the right wing, so to back up a little bit, Trump has essentially organized an army of stochastic terrorists in his favor. There are people who are mentally ill. There are people who are gun fetishists in one form or another who've decided he's their man, and someone else could become their man or their woman at some later point in time. But right now, Trump is their man, and he's created all kinds of room in his politics for the role of these people. In fact, January 6th was in fact there is now evidence of a collaboration in the January 6th events, where you have these militias, these right-wing militias, coordinating with the president, and or there's strong evidence that might have happened, and they certainly acted as though that they are allies or collude with each other. Colluding meaning a lower form of conspiracy or of direct collaboration. So anyway, but they certainly colluded 100%, and they feel themselves to be allied. And Donald Trump calls out to various, often to this, or sometimes to these groups, and he suggests that in fact they are his people, and part of being his people means a willingness to threaten with arms and to be willing to, or to punch or with fists or whatever it is, but also, and that is a form of, and he's done that throughout his presidential political career, 2015 onward. So anyway, so you have, so there's a choice then as the political forces opposing fascists. Either you feel fear and be intimidated and you step backward, or you attempt to use rule of law to prosecute where necessary, where these threats are actual, or where not just the threat, but also the threat covers up criminality, because often the two go together. But anyway, where you meet the bluster, bravado, and actual physical offensive activities, the offensive military or paramilitary activities with legal means, including the use of police to and to arrest and then to prosecute if necessary, if they have committed crimes, or if they likely have committed crimes, these people, and not to stand back and say, oh, I'm too frightened. I'm too scared about the consequences. So the problem is that the Democratic leadership has acted as though they are too scared and too frightened of Donald Trump and of other, maybe Ron DeSantis in the future, any number of other right-wing politicians who call to this tradition of threat and bluster in America and Second Amendment, rights and so forth and so on, as a means of political intimidation and of threat. And they create a scenario where someone's trying to take away their gun, and so therefore they're going to shoot them. And so the scenario is such that, they any move to reasonable gun control, for instance, is made to seem like this kind of gun grabbing, okay? And some of it would be, we should have a big gun buyback program. We should have all kinds of laws about, purchasing guns and so on. And maybe, I don't know. We're not anywhere near quote unquote banning guns, but we certainly need to make it much, much harder to get a gun and use a gun. And and that's not grabbing a gun, but to these people that seems to be quote unquote grabbing a gun. And then, but anyway, they're using this scenario to activate these people who are willing to, who seem to be willing to fight physically and to issue threats unendingly, unstintingly against people who say, "Look, we got to deal with this gun violence issue," and so anyway. What I'm talking about, though, is that this choice is very, very stark for the Democratic leadership, and I'm afraid that they have chosen the path of timidity and of intimidation rather than the path of imposition of rule of law, and that will lead very quickly to fascism. Okay, that there's no middle ground. Okay, in this, that they need to assert rule of law, prosecute crimes, high crimes and misdemeanors, whatever crimes they are that are committed by whomever, including members of this right-wing fascist or proto-fascist group of people, either on the ground or in the leadership, and prosecute to the fullest extent of the law those people, because when they commit crimes and when they have committed crimes, and then that if they don't do this, they are sending the message that it's okay, and furthermore that it works, that the intimidation works. So the point, they are feeding the fascistic modus operandi because they are responding to physical intimidation by being timid, by being fearful. And that's the wrong way. And there are ways in which the Democratic leadership sidesteps this by saying, well, no, we're just trying to collaborate and cooperate. We're trying to create these bipartisan, for instance, gun control efforts that are very, very weak. But that's avoiding the intimidation factor. That's especially without, for instance, indicting Trump, which needs to happen, indicting Mark Meadows, indicting Ginny Thomas, or impeaching Clarence Thomas. All these things that are shoring up the rule of law in the United States, that's under attack by fascists and by the Republican Party. When the Democrats let go of that because they're afraid. And the fear is made to seem commonsensical, it immediately cedes more ground. So they're ceding political ground. They're opening the political field for more and more power to accumulate on the right wing. And it's a simple, it is like a battlefield in a way, where you have on the one hand people who need to use rule of law to claim ground, and on the other side who use physical intimidation and threats and undermining of rule of law to claim ground on their end. So, and I will return to this because this is it's something that's staring people in the face. It's kind of mundane. People say, well, of course fascists intimidate and threaten by means of bluster and bravado and so on and so on, by symbols, by death's heads, and by, all these, symbologies that they're using and so forth and so on. But saying, well, but notice the intimidation and decide to respond to it in a way that is not fear-based, but is based in, you could say, love or solidarity or belief in peaceful coexistence and collaboration and cooperation, but doesn't allow for excludes physical intimidation from the processes of a democracy. And that needs to happen, and that requires, I think, a cultural change. It's not super easy to do, but it requires you to notice the moment of intimidation, the moment in which you are being threatened, and deciding, I am not going to be threatened. I am going to go ahead and do my job. And unfortunately, there are very few people people on the ground can decide to do this, and I want people to do that. But there's, unfortunately, hanging by a thread, there are a few politicians, political operatives, who, including Biden and Garland, who are now hold the keys, in some sense, to the full-scale retreat of the fearful and intimidated, because they act that way, or the surging forward of the objects of intimidation using rule of law, using civil means and criminal legal means to make sure the polity, make sure our government runs using democratic means and not fascistic means of by might making right, by power, dictating power, physical power, intimidation, dictating the course of events. And just as a sidebar, the police and elements of the police are attracted to this because part of their job is using physical intimidation to stop crime. So police need to develop a sophisticated understanding of where physical intimidation supports rule of law and where physical intimidation is simply a manifestation of a cultural fascistoid culture in the law enforcement. And so, unfortunately, in the United States, many elements of law enforcement are caught up in this fetish of intimidation and, sadistic. I've called it sadistic in the past. Sadistic displays of cruelty as a means to supposedly intimidate criminals. They need to modulate that. So it requires some thinking about where does physical intimidation play a role in our society. It can't be banished in the area of law enforcement, certainly, but how can that be limited in ways where it's used judiciously and wisely so as not to overwhelm the society and make the society live in a culture of just threat. Now, threats could be things like civil threats and intimidation by smearing and by character assassination, so forth and so on. So there's not only physical threat, but physical threat is the starkest and clearest version of this. But there are also ways in which various other kinds of threat can be used. But very basic is we need to banish physical intimidation from the public sphere. So anyway, I hope this essay or this, whatever video blog is clarifying or interesting to you, and please respond in the comments below with any thoughts you have based on it. Please like the video if you liked it, and also please subscribe to Politics 2100 for more content like this. Talk to you soon.